Did you know that St. Luke's University Health Network, based in the Lehigh Valley, Pennsylvania, has been recognized by the U.S. government as the highest performing health system in the United States for quality? You heard right. St. Luke's #1 recognition affirms our status as the top leader among the most respected healthcare providers in the nation, including Houston Methodist and the Mayo Clinic. To state it simply, if you want to receive the best care when you go to a hospital, come to St. Luke's.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative
on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
You are now entering the Stone Zone. Well, just as President Richard Nixon leveraged a trip to China in order to secure a strategic arms limitation agreement with the Russians, President Donald Trump has had a triumphant tour of China, and he's come back with the goods. The president went there pursuing major economic deals with China, seeking to get greater Chinese purchases of American goods and establish a U.S.-China Board of Trade to try to stabilize bilateral relations. The centerpiece, of course, this was China's commitment to buy 200 Boeing aircraft alongside their commitment to take on and buy expanded U.S. imports of agricultural products such as soybeans, beef, and pork. Discussions, of course, also center beyond trade tensions to the ongoing situation regarding Iran and Taiwan, both of which were evidently on the agenda. While the White House emphasizes that progress on economic cooperation and market access are continuing, the Chinese, of course, said once again that Taiwan is off the table. But it is clear the president did secure key agreements during his visit to China aimed at resolving the impasse over the Strait of Hormuz. That's where the Iranians have closed down that crucial waterway through which almost 30% of the world's oil must flow in terms of shipping. China agreed not to send weapons to Iran and committed to help end that conflict, with President Xi Jinping reportedly offering to provide, quote, whatever Trump needs, close quote, to achieve a resolution. China is, of course, Iran's largest oil producer, purchasing almost 90% of its exports, and therefore holds significant leverage, which the U.S. sought to harness diplomatically. At the same time, Trump, through his actions in Venezuela and Iran, has cut off China's access to cheap, affordable oil. Also on the agenda was an end to China's flow of fentanyl precursors into the United States, a shift in Chinese energy imports towards American oil and natural gas, reducing the dependence on the energy flowing through the Straits of Hormuz. As I said earlier, increased Chinese purchases of U.S. agricultural goods, as well as 200 Boeing military jets, and mutual agreement that Iran cannot possess nuclear weapons or militarize the Strait of Hormuz. Trump had previously threatened tariffs on nations who aid Iran and emphasized U.S. military readiness, but framed the outcome as a cooperative diplomatic success. The deal was seen as pivotal in terms of stabilizing global energy flows amid the heightened Mideastern tensions. Meanwhile, here's some common sense from the U.S. Senate. The U.S. Senate has unanimously approved a resolution to stop U.S. senators from collecting their paychecks during a government shutdown. The measure, sponsored by Louisiana Republican Senator John Kennedy, passed Wednesday by a voice vote. Because it applies only to the Senate, does not need approval from the House or President Trump's signature for that matter. Kennedy called it a matter of shared sacrifice. Senator Kennedy, sometimes referred to as the foghorn leghorn of the Senate, stated that if senators vote to shut down the government and leave federal workers unpaid, they shouldn't keep cashing checks themselves. This is simply common sense. Under the resolution, the Secretary of the Senate would withhold senators' pay during any shutdown and release it only after the government reopens. The rule takes effect after the midterm elections, meaning it could apply to a potential end-of-year shutdown, but not before the fiscal year ends in September. That'd be September 30th. The vote comes after a months-long partial shutdown affecting the Department of Homeland Security as Democrats push ICE reforms and sought to restrict funding for immigration enforcement and the Border Patrol. With the likelihood of immigration enforcement and intransigent Democrats looking to undermine the country at every turn, it is irresponsible, to my opinion, for U.S. senators to keep taking a paycheck while essential government employees suffer. Washington politicians should not be insulated from the consequences of their own gamesmanship. If law enforcement, border agents, and military families are expected to feel the pain of a shutdown, well, then I think senators should feel the pain too. The ruling class has spent too long protecting itself while ordinary Americans pay the price. Senator Kennedy's resolution sends the right message that senators deserve no special treatment, no protected paychecks, and no more Washington privilege during these future shutdowns. Meanwhile, the historic progress from the Trump administration at the border, the Department of Homeland Security says that April 12th marked 12 straight months of zero releases of illegal aliens apprehended by the Border Patrol at the southwest border of the United States. The Department of Homeland Security called it one of the clearest signs yet that President Trump's border policies are working. Secretary Markwayne Mullin said the days of catch and release are over, and the illegal aliens are being sent back to their home countries instead of being released into the United States. The numbers show a dramatic reversal from the Biden era. According to the Department of Homeland Security's latest reports, southwest border apprehensions in April were down 94% than the monthly average under Biden and 96% below the December 2023 crisis peak. In April, Border Patrols recorded 8,943 apprehensions along the southwest border, less than what agents encountered in just 3 days of April 2024. So the daily average was 298 apprehensions, lower than what agents saw in a single hour during the worst of the Biden border crisis. The Border Patrol Commissioner, Rodney Scott, contrasted that with 2 years ago when more than 68,000 illegal aliens were released into the United States interior in just 1 month. DHS also says drug seizures are up sharply, with agents no longer overwhelmingly processing and releasing illegal migrants. CBS, the Border Patrol, has seized 61% more drugs through this fiscal year through April than during the same period of last year. This means that the immigration crisis was always a crisis of will. When Joe Biden insisted he needed new laws in order to close our border, he wasn't telling us the truth. All we needed to do was to enforce the laws that were already on the books. Let's face it, the Biden administration wanted the illegals to come over because Democrats want the demographic collapse of America. They want the refuse of the third world so they can buy them off with welfare and allow them to commit Medicaid fraud so they ultimately will vote Democrat in perpetuity. Borders can be easily secured when leaders choose enforcement over surrender. President Trump ended catch and release, reinstated consequences, and freed agents to do their jobs. And the result is a miraculous outcome that is making America stronger and safer. Meanwhile, the Center for Disease Control says that 41 people in the United States are now being monitored for hantavirus after an outbreak tied to a cruise ship, the Hondius. Most of those watched were aboard the vessel, which sailed from Argentina on April 1st to remove destinations which sailed, including Antarctica, I believe. The ship experienced a hantavirus outbreak that has now drawn international attention, has been speculated to be the next COVID-style public health emergency that had been foretold in this case by the globalist elite. 18 people were recently flown to medical facilities in Nebraska and Georgia for quarantine during the virus's incubation period, which can last up to 42 days. Others had already left the ship before the outbreak was detected and are now being monitored in home states such as Arizona and California. A third group includes people exposed during travel after coming into close contact with these cruise ship passengers, including on airplanes. According to the World Health Organization, 11 passengers worldwide are confirmed or suspected to have contracted this hantavirus. 3 have already died. Hantavirus is usually spread from infected rodents to humans, but health officials believe person-to-person transmission may have occurred aboard the ship. The Center for Disease Control says the risk to the general public remains extremely low, and no mandatory U.S. quarantine orders have been issued. Still, state officials in Kansas, Maryland, New Jersey, and Washington, as well as elsewhere, are monitoring the possible exposures. It does seem strange now that humans are allegedly transmitting a virus between each other when they told us that couldn't be done. Perhaps there has been some kind of gain-of-function experimentation going on to weaponize a strain of this virus, similar to what was done with COVID-19. We can't really know for sure. All we do know is that nobody has been held accountable for the crimes of COVID-19. So what is really stopping them from doing it again? Our society is continuously being held hostage to the whims of demonic, God-hating technocrats. Meanwhile, Secretary of State Marco Rubio says that Cuba's communist regime rejected a $100 million U.S. humanitarian aid package that would have gone directly to the Cuban people through the Catholic Church. Rubio told Fox News that Trump administration officials offered the assistance to help Cubans suffering under food shortages, fuel scarcity, medicine shortages, and a collapsing economy. The State Department says the offer also included support for free satellite internet, but Havana refused to allow the aid to reach the people directly. That internet access is what they fear the most. You see, the communists do an excellent job of blocking any radio transmissions or television transmissions from the United States. Therefore, the Cuban people have been told for decades that all of their problems, from the shortage of food to the shortage of gasoline, all of their problems are the fault of those angry Yankees. They feel like accepting the kindness from the United States would undermine their communist, anti-American narrative, and they must continue to oppress their own people to keep them under their thumb. The department publicly renewed the offer this week, saying the choice now rests with the Cuban regime. The United States and the Catholic Church have already proven this model can work. Earlier this year, USA distributed through Catholic channels delivered food, hygiene supplies, and other essentials to Cubans affected by Hurricane Melissa. Cuban Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez denied that rejecting good faith assistance and claimed that the regime merely wants details while blaming U.S. sanctions and demanding an end, once again, to the embargo. But these are just excuses from a failing regime that's desperately tried to cling on to power. Aid routing through the church would prevent self-serving communist officials from diverting foreign assistance from the people who need it the most and then putting it in their own pockets. Mexicans reportedly previously found that donated supplies intended for Cuba were sold in military-run stores at unaffordable dollar prices. This is what an operation in Venezuela was like and what inevitably happened in Cuba. There's no reason why the people in Cuba need to be oppressed any longer. The Donroe Doctrine is on its way, and it will end the suffering and end the narco-Marxism going on just 90 miles from our shore. My opinion, and remember I'm married to a Cuban American, this could be Trump's greatest single legacy. You see, there is an industry in Miami of those who oppose Castro. They get hundreds of thousands of dollars from USAID. They get millions of dollars in campaign contributions, yet the plight of the Cuban people doesn't get any better. It's time for President Donald Trump and Secretary of State Marco Rubio to open the door to a free Cuba. Cuba Libre. I'm Roger Stone. You're listening to the Stone Zone. Don't go away because we'll be right back.
This episode is brought to you by Redfin. You're listening to a podcast, which means you're probably multitasking. Maybe even scrolling home listings on Redfin, saving homes without expecting to get them. But Redfin isn't just built for endless browsing. It's built to help you find and own a home. With agents who close twice as many deals, when you find the one, you've got a real shot at getting it. Get started at redfin.com. Own the dream.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
And we're back in the Stone Zone. I'm joining you today from Washington, D.C., Only yesterday, I visited Arlington National Cemetery to visit the gravesite of my political mentor, former Connecticut Governor John Davis Lodge. Now, John Lodge, of course, was the brother of Senator Henry Cabot Lodge, the grandson of Henry Cabot Lodge, who was Theodore Roosevelt's best friend and also a U.S. Senator from Massachusetts, like his son, Henry Cabot Lodge. But John Lodge was an interesting guy. He was an actor. He was most famous for his role of, opposite Marlene Dietrich in The Scarlet Empress. He also played Shirley Temple's father in The Little Colonel. But beyond his career as an actor, he was a congressman, then one-term governor of the state of Connecticut, followed by his service as the ambassador to Spain under Dwight Eisenhower, the ambassador to Argentina under Richard Nixon, and then lastly, the ambassador to Switzerland under President Ronald Reagan. It was John Davis Lodge, who I met as a young man, who was really my political mentor. It was Lodge who got me my job with Richard Nixon, working in his 72 reelection, also working as the chairman of Youth for Nixon when I lived in Connecticut. Lodge was actually the progenitor of the famous saying that politics is the art of inclusion. And it was Lodge who ironically, in a juxtaposition of our careers, he helped my early career. But in 1979, when I was sent to Connecticut, New York, and New Jersey to organize those states for Ronald Reagan, I sought the former governor and ambassador out to chair Ronald Reagan's campaign in the Nutmeg State. That, of course, was a great affront to the Bushes as governor of Connecticut when there was a vacancy in the U.S. Senate caused by the death of U.S. Senator Brian McMahon. John Lodge had actually declined to appoint Prescott Bush, George H.W. Bush's father, to the U.S. Senate. Although they were all Brahmins, there was no love lost between the Bushes and the Lodges. Therefore, I repaid the favor. Just as John Lodge got me my start in politics, I lobbied hard to make him ambassador to Switzerland. Some at the State Department argued that he was too old for public service, but that was not the case. He served with distinction. It was great. It was a great honor and really very moving to go to Arlington Cemetery, to visit his gravesite, and to see the gravesites of so many men and women who gave their lives that we may be free. I'm Roger Stone. You're listening to Stone Zone. Don't go away because we'll be right back.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
You are now re-entering the Stone Zone. Well, according to explosive testimony yesterday before the Senate Homeland Security Committee, the CIA was accused of taking back 40 boxes of documents pertaining to the Kennedy assassination and the controversial MK Ultra mind control program from the offices of the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard. Documents reportedly being prepared for declassification and public release. A CIA whistleblower, one James Erdman III, has claimed the agency not only seized the files, but also monitored the computers and phones of Gabbard's investigators as they examined an alleged cover-up surrounding the origins of COVID-19. Now, let's be abundantly clear. Tulsi Gabbard has been doing exactly what the American people deserve, pushing sunlight, accountability, and truth in a government too often addicted to secrecy. It was, after all, Tulsi Gabbard, the Director of National Intelligence, who declassified all the documents that proved once and for all that the claims of Russian collusion in the election of Donald Trump in 2016 were entirely a hoax. She followed that up by declassifying documents that proved, without any doubt whatsoever, that the two impeachments were also based totally on fabricated evidence. So all of those attacking Tulsi Gabbard now should be looked on with suspicion, as the deep state really fears her. She's been incredibly brave and effective in her role with the DNI, and all those who are trying to subvert her, such as the reality-detached ghoul, Laura Loomer, well, I think they should be ashamed of themselves. Former CIA officer Robert Carrico told Fox News that the agency has no authority to overrule either the president or the director of national intelligence. He said the files were mandated for declassification and that Americans have the right to know what is inside. Congresswoman Anna Paulina Lunar said the CIA has 24 hours to return the records or face a congressional subpoena. She called the seizure deeply troubling, especially because President Trump had ordered full declassification of all of the records pertaining to the Kennedy assassination. The CIA, in turn, denies bad faith and calls the hearing political theater. But that is what CIA spooks always do. They lie and deny. It's what they're best at. After decades of secrecy, destroyed records, discredited denials around the controversial MK-Ultra mind control program, by the way, CIA Director Richard Helms destroyed most of those documents on the very day that the existence of the program leaked to the Washington Post and was published on page 1. That was back in 1974. But they've also lied about the Kennedy assassination and virtually everything else under the sun. Americans deserve the right to know. We can no longer be allowed to hide under the cloak of national security. It's time for the CIA to face public scrutiny has been skirting since its very inception. People don't know this, but on the day after Kennedy's assassination, President Harry Truman wrote an op-ed piece for the Washington Post in which he said that signing the CIA into law was the greatest single mistake that he had ever made, and went on to say that they had violated their charter, which determined that they were only to operate abroad and they were not to operate in the United States. That op-ed by a former president of the United States only ran for one edition before it was spiked by the Washington Post, leading to my longtime suspicion that the Washington Post is also controlled by the Central Intelligence Agency. Glad to see that my good friend Rudy Giuliani is back on the air after having made a miraculous recovery following a life-threatening health scare. America's mayor says the experience was a deeply spiritual one for him. The 81-year-old former New York City mayor, perhaps the greatest mayor in New York history, revealed Wednesday that he had battled a serious case of pneumonia that sent him to the hospital, according to friends, and very briefly put him into a coma. During his first broadcast of America's Mayor Live, which is what he calls his show, since being hospitalized, Giuliani said that he had what was called a very significant spiritual experience. He described feeling as though he was headed towards a trial before St. Peter, when his late lifelong friend and former top aide, Peter Powers, appeared in a dreamlike intervention. Giuliani said Powers spoke meaningful words to him and that he recorded the memory shortly after he woke up. He also woke up with a priest at the hospital because they did administer last rites to New York's greatest mayor. Powers, a good man who died in 2016, was Giuliani's high school friend, campaign manager, and his first deputy mayor. Giuliani was hospitalized in critical condition on May 3rd with viral pneumonia, apparently worsened by the respiratory problems dating back to the aftermath of the September 11th terror attacks. Now, Giuliani says he's making a strong recovery and feels like his old self. He's resumed light exercise, walks stairs, and says he feels 100%, even if doctors may not quite agree yet. He also thanked President Trump, calling him a terrific friend and a godsend to this country. Rudy Giuliani's story is one of faith, friendship, resilience, and gratitude, and a fighting spirit of a man who helped lead America through one of its darkest days. Rudy Giuliani still has a lot more good work to do to help this country and the MAGA renaissance that's going on. We need fighters like him on the front lines for our nation. The Lord has answered our prayers, including mine, and Rudy Giuliani will be continuing to fight alongside us as a result. More good news for the American economy. Kevin Warsh has been narrowly confirmed by the Senate as the 17th chairman of the Federal Reserve, replacing the Trump-hating partisan hack Jerome Too Late Powell, who, by the way, is a lawyer and not even an economist. 8 years of Powell were marked by crisis, conflict, and growing frustration over the central bank's mismanagement of the American economy. Warsh, a Trump appointee, was confirmed this past Wednesday by a 54-45 vote, mostly along party lines. Only Democrat Senator John Fetterman of Pennsylvania crossed over to support him. The vote was one of the most partisan confirmations for a Federal Reserve chair in the history, showing once again how Democrats will stop at nothing to try to sabotage President Trump, even if it means hurting the American people and our economy. Kevin Warsh is widely seen as more aligned with Trump's economic agenda and is expected to bring long overdue reform to an institution that has become bloated, opaque, and much too insulated from democratic oversight. That's democratic with a small d. Warsh has supported shrinking the Fed's massive $6.7 trillion balance sheet, cutting back Washington staffing, policies, meetings, and holding fewer press conferences, ending the Fed's habit of constantly telegraphing interest rate moves, and otherwise ignoring the two criteria for an interest rate cut: unemployment and inflation. Warsh has argued that years of massive bond buying made the Fed too entangled with government spending and the financial markets. His first meeting as chair is scheduled for June 16th and 17th. And incredibly, Powell will remain as a governor for now because he remains doggedly obsessed with helping to undermine President Trump. Only twice in the Federal Reserve's 113-year history has a Federal Reserve Board governor remained on the board after no longer serving as chairman. After Warsh is officially confirmed, it may be time to fire back up the investigations into Powell and his multi-billion-dollar federal renovation of his already palatial headquarters. There is no question whatsoever that Powell lied before the Congress. It's hard to believe that Warsh could do any worse than his predecessor. I think we're going to get the Federal Reserve interest rate cut that America believes. But how the Senate gets away with hearing Chairman Powell say very specifically that his multi-billion-dollar renovation of the already palatial Federal Reserve headquarters does not include a private elevator for the Fed governors. That was a lie. Does not include a private dining room for the Fed governors. That was a lie. And did not include a palatial roof garden reserved only for the Federal Reserve governors. Three simple lies, all under oath. When the entity, like the Fed, has the ability to print money out of thin air with no limits, they tend to abuse that power, which is why perhaps it's time to end the Federal Reserve forever, as former Texas Congressman Ron Paul has frequently urged. We should perhaps just repeal the Federal Reserve Act and do away with this monstrosity. Meanwhile, President Donald Trump says Cuba is asking for help and the United States is willing to talk. In a Truth Social post on Tuesday, Trump called Cuba a failed country headed down, adding that Havana is seeking assistance and that talks will happen. But so far, the Cubans have refused a $100 million offer of assistance unless that assistance was handed over to the Cuban government rather than a third party such as the Catholic Church. The president has made Cuba a major focus of his second term, increasing pressure on the communist regime through sanctions, an oil blockade, and repeated warnings from his administration. Trump said that Cuba is not doing well. That would be an understatement, and said the issue would be addressed at the right time. See, when the president essentially ended the flow of oil from Venezuela to Cuba, Cuba lost its access to cheap oil. A White House official went further, saying within a short period of time, Cuba's regime could fall, and then America would be there to help. President Trump has imposed multiple sanctions aimed at choking off the communist leadership and enforcing real concessions. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, whose family roots, of course, trace to Cuba, announced additional penalties back on May 7th. Earlier, President Trump broadened sanctions against regime officials, affiliates, and anyone tied to corruption or human rights abuses. There's also talk of indicting Raul Castro, now 94, the brother of Fidel Castro, and his successor in the violent shoot-down of the Brothers to the Rescue mission over Cuba some years ago. The administration has also targeted countries providing oil to Cuba, worsening pressure on Havana's already fragile energy system. Blackouts are widespread. There's fuel rationing, and shortage have become part of daily life for Cubans trapped under the decades of socialist failure. Cuban Americans, including Fidel Castro's daughter, have urged Trump to turn his attention onto the island. President Trump has described the possibility of fleeing or even taking Cuba as an honor. With the removal of Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela happening so quickly, and the new regime in Venezuela working closely with the U.S., President Trump is emboldened to embark on similar measures, I think, now to liberate Cuba, and the time is now. Communism has failed. Cuba is collapsing. If America can help open the door to freedom without expending blood and treasure, we absolutely should do so. Meanwhile, House Democrats are teaming up with a handful of turncoat Republicans to force another Ukraine funding vote, defying Speaker Mike Johnson and the America First wing of the Republican Party. All 215 House Democrats signed a discharge petition to bypass the House leadership and bring Ukrainian support to the floor. They were joined by Republicans Brian Fitzpatrick and Don Bacon. Those are what we call rhinos, Republicans in name only, along with California independent Kevin Kiley and the anti-Trump taters of the caucus, giving the petition the 218 signatures needed to proceed. The bill would send another $1.3 billion in military aid and assistance to Ukraine, with the possibility of up to $8 billion more in direct loans. Loan that critics warn will become loans in names only, as the money goes straight up Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's nose. The legislation also reaffirms U.S. support for Ukraine and NATO, backs reconstruction efforts, and expands sanctions and export controls against Russia's financial, oil, mining, and political sectors. The American people are tired of this war, and they're tired to pay for it, but Democrat Gregory Meeks urged quick passage of this new $1.3 billion present from Uncle Sam, saying Ukraine's fighters are waiting. Meeks is not wrong. Ukraine's soldiers are certainly waiting to die in a war being waged for globalists that has zero chance of victory. Many Americans are fed up as arms in Washington, D.C. swamp find more money to wage foreign wars, while America faces a projected $1.9 trillion deficit, an immigration crisis, struggling families, and crumbling infrastructure here at home. Ukraine and Russia have resumed fighting after a short ceasefire, as Russia continues to make gains in Eastern Europe's Donbass region. Yet instead of putting an end to this madness, the D.C. War Caucus wants to write them another huge check. Sadly, the bill will likely pass the House, but it faces a tougher path in the U.S. Senate. That's where Republicans have to put their foot down. This war is only being waged as a proxy because butthurt globalists hate Russia so much. Millions have died needlessly as a result. If we turn off the spigot of aid, then the fighting can stop, and Zelensky can face justice in the streets as he deserves. He's put off elections because he knows he would lose. It is time to end this conflict. Thanks for joining the Stone Zone. We'll be right back.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
And you're back in the Stone Zone. Today, joining you live from Washington, D.C. Well, the U.S. government has admitted that it violated the First Amendment rights of a reporter by pressuring social media companies to suppress disfavored speech during the COVID-19 era. According to a May 11th legal settlement obtained by the Epoch Times, federal officials agreed to pay former New York Times reporter Alex Berenson $150,000 after he sued over his 2021 Twitter ban. Berenson was kicked off of Twitter after opposing the COVID vaccine madness and the mandates, arguing that the shots did not stop infection or transmission, a claim once treated as a forbidden speech, but later proven to be absolutely true as the lies from the American public health establishment continued to unravel. The settlement says the government exerted substantial coercive pressure on platforms like Twitter and Facebook to suppress speech like Berenson's. When the government essentially commands entities to enact censorship, that is, without a shadow of a doubt, a violation of our free speech rights and the First Amendment. Berenson thanked the Trump administration for acknowledging the unconstitutional actions taken against him during the Biden administration and for standing up for his rights as a journalist and American. Twitter had already settled separately from Berenson, acknowledging that he should never have been banned. Emails disclosed in other litigation showed that Biden officials and Pfizer board member Dr. Scott Gottlieb communicated with Twitter executives about Berenson's post and whether he should be silenced. Berenson says he will continue to pursue Gottlieb and Pfizer chairman Albert Bourla in legal action over their alleged role in silencing him. Their lawyers deny any wrongdoing, of course, but this case confirms what we already knew. The COVID regime used government power, big tech, and corporate influence to crush dissent. The same people who shouted, "Trust the silence," were trampling our natural rights. They will do it again if they haven't given the chance. We must never give them that chance and resist their tyranny by any means necessary. Meanwhile, Vice President J.D. Vance announced Wednesday the Trump administration is withholding $1.3 billion in Medicaid aid reimbursements from California, citing serious fraud concerns and accusing the state of failing to protect the taxpayers. Speaking at a press conference, Vice President Vance said California has not taken fraud very seriously, warning that both California taxpayers and Americans nationwide are being defrauded when state officials fail to police abuse inside Medicaid. Vice President Vance said the problem is not just financial abuse, but fraudsters have pushed false prescriptions and unnecessary medication, meaning some patients may have received drugs they did not need because California failed to properly safeguard the program. The vice president said the anti-fraud task force he leads will now send letters to every Medicaid program requiring them to prove they are aggressively prosecuting fraud. States that fail to act could lose funding for anti-fraud units and potentially other Medicaid resources if this problem persists. Vice President Vance emphasized that the goal is not to cut off health care funding, but to protect Medicaid and Medicare from waste, corruption, and abuse. He also pointed to states like Hawaii and New York, where he said Medicaid fraud convictions have been minimal in recent years. By contrast, Indiana, for example, with roughly 1/3 of New York's population, has reportedly had 4 times as many convictions for Medicaid fraud. Vice President Vance called the disparity absurd, asking whether anyone seriously believes that the people of Indiana are dramatically more likely to commit fraud than New Yorkers. Of course, the Democrats have been deliberately taking a blind eye to these offenses for a great number of years because this is how they repay their constituents. They're happy to allow illegals and other dirtbags to line their pockets with spoils from the U.S. taxpayers. That's their recipe for permanent political success. But the Trump administration is cutting off that gravy train, and not a moment too soon. I'm Roger Stone. Thank you for joining us today in the Stone Zone. We're here 5 days a week, bringing you the inside skinny on American politics. Until tomorrow, God bless you and Godspeed.
Thanks for listening to The Stone Zone with Roger Stone. You can hear The Stone Zone with Roger Stone weeknights at 8 on 77 WABC. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode so you never have to wonder.
What the heck is going on here?